In this video, we're going to be going through a PAILs rail setup for thoracic spine extension in what is known as a prone Sphinx position. Now, if you're someone who is limited in thoracic spine extension, then this is probably the first position I'm going to be getting you to do to actually try and open up some workspace in the T-spine in what is known as extension rather than flexion. So it's really important to understand what our T-spine is when we think of it and when we go to contract it. We've seen it, for example, in probably our segmental spine cars where we've tried to move each individual vertebrae. And with this PAILs rail setup, it's going to actually help us open up some workspace that might be sort of lacking there at the moment. It's probably something that we saw in one of your assessment videos as well. When we look at the spine, we have our cervical spine, which is essentially our neck. We have our thoracic spine, which is essentially like the area of what would be like the ribs and the chest. And then we have our lumbar spine, which is our lower back. So we try to think of it as each individual vertebrae, but then we do need to think of it then as those segments. And when we look at the segment that is the thoracic spine, this sort of area here from like say bottom of the neck to say bottom of the ribs, it does actually have a sort of set position in more flexion rather than extension. So we need to keep that in mind. And the specifics of this position will mean that we have to be aware of when it's coming from our lower back versus when the extension is actually coming from our mid back, which is obviously the purpose of what we're trying to open up with this position. Another thing is the idea of actually contracting the spine. It's very easy in this position to start using like bigger muscles like the shoulders, the pecs, your back, your lats and stuff like that to kind of overpower the movement. But I really want you to focus consciously on going as sort of deep and specific to the vertebrae and try to feel the connection and contraction in those areas. So try not to think of, say, like the shoulders, the ribs, those sort of things moving. Try to really consciously focus on getting deep into your spine and the movement coming from the vertebrae, okay? Enough talking, let's actually get into the position and have a look at what we're doing for today. So when we get into this position, we're just gonna lay flat down on our stomach initially. We're gonna be in a position like so, where I kind of have the elbows underneath me. You can imagine the Sphinx in Egypt, this sort of position like so. But the problem with getting into this position like this straight away and just going, okay, cool, extend the spine and go from there. The problem is a lot of the extension is likely coming from the lower back. You'll see here I've got my hips pushing into the ground, I've got my elbows underneath my shoulder, and I think, great, I'm in this sort of T-spine extension position. I'm getting a sort of increased awareness of my lower back here because that's where most of the extension is coming from. So in order to get into this position and make sure that it is coming from the T-spine, I want you to lay flat down on your stomach initially. What we're going to do from here is we're going to keep our forehead on the ground. We're going to start at our neck. And we're going to, just like we do with the segmented cat-camel, we're going to go one vertebrae at a time all the way into our thoracic spine, and then we're going to hold our position. So my hands are on the ground here, but they're not pushing at all. You can almost imagine like they're floating down, and I'm going to just move from the head first. So I'll retract my chin, lift, and try to go into extension. So from here I go my eyes first all the way up to the ceiling. Now I'm just thinking about like a wave of tension going up through my mid-back. I can assist now and give a little bit of a push on my hands. And what I'm actually going to try and do here is I'm going to go out nice and far with my hands, prop my elbows down on the ground, and now I'm almost sort of supported with my hands, and I don't have to contract my spine anymore. So this is a much different position compared to when I first got into it and I just propped my hands or my elbows underneath my shoulders and I got up from here. What I can try to do here to get more extension is I can try to engage my shoulder blades a little bit and try and pull them down into depression and just push with my hands and elbows into the ground, and it's just gonna force me into more thoracic extension. So I'm using my arms as a wedge in some sense to try and just get a little bit more extension out of my mid-back, and this position is a lot better for me. I'm getting no real sort of heightened awareness around my lumbar spine. I'm getting a much more heightened awareness around my thoracic spine. We're going to set the timer and we're going to perform our PAILs rail set together, okay? So once you've sort of got into position just like I am, just like that setup I went through there, now we can set the time from here. So if you need to pause and play, that's more than okay. What I'm going to do from here is I'm going to just get my elbows a little bit narrower, this way that when I go to push down, I'm just going to have more sort of weight underneath me, and it's going to be a much better position to start my PAILs rails effort from, okay? But while I'm in this position, what I want you to try and do is focus on, say, a high point in the room. Make sure that you're not getting too much unwanted tension in your neck. If you need to relax it down and look ahead, that's more than okay. But if you're comfortable enough to sort of keep a high position with your eyes, that's going to help you in just maintaining a little bit more thoracic extension. So we're both going to try and sort of segment with our vertebrae. We're going to try and almost like lift our sternum through our arms forward to the wall in front of us, while also focusing on the posterior side, that back side of our spine, where we're sort of thinking of more extension coming from the mid-back, the sort of closing of space on that posterior side, the opening of space on this anterior side. And this is where, just if you've never moved your spine in this capacity, this is where a lot of this is going to be a little bit confusing. So provided you feel like you're comfortable in this position, like you're not getting any unwanted stress on your lumbar spine, you're likely fine and you're doing this position correctly. Don't worry if you don't nail this the first time in terms of the actual PAILs rails effort. You might not get as much of a contraction out of it, or you might not feel you open up much workspace just because you're not really aware of how to do it. It's your first time doing it. You'll likely not nail it the first time, but with repeated effort, focusing in on a lot of these cues, you'll certainly get a better awareness of what movement from the thoracic spine is and how to open up space in thoracic extension like we're doing right now. From here, what I want you to do is take a deep breath in, pack it into your lower abdomen, and start to irradiate and increase tension throughout the body. So I essentially just want you to tense and brace all of the muscles of the body, okay? Very slowly, what I now want you to start doing is I want you to start going for your PAILs effort. You're gonna imagine that you're trying to flex the thoracic spine. That would be almost like an ab crunch type motion, but your hands are there to stop you and your elbows are there to stop you from actually pushing down. So your arms are stiff and you're trying to almost dip your chin down and drop your chest towards the floor. That's essentially your spine going into flexion. But as I said, your hands are there to stop you. The stiffness running throughout the body is there to actually stop you from doing that. Now you're gonna go into your rails effort. You're gonna go in the opposite direction. You're actually gonna try and lift your chest through your arms. You're gonna try and get yourself into more thoracic extension. So focus on the posterior side, the back side of your vertebrae. That side is closing and getting shorter, and you're trying to extend your thoracic spine, not your lumbar spine. Remember, thoracic spine extension. Now I want you to relax, take a big breath and exhale. Big breath in again. Let's get the neck nice and long. Let's press down with our shoulders. Let's try to pull them down and drive our elbows into the ground. And we should feel right now like we've got a little bit of movement or some sort of awareness of our spine contracting and relaxing with that PAILs rails effort. So the first one, we didn't necessarily focus too much on the level of tension that we're getting to, but if you feel confident with this, if you feel like you've done it a few times before, now I'll encourage you to actually increase the percentage effort. We can go towards what is our greatest, safest max effort. So really heightened levels of tension. Inhale, brace. Now slowly start driving down into spinal flexion. So you're starting to push down, your hands are stiff though, they're stopping you from actually moving. And the focus here is almost like closing the space on the anterior side, the front side of the spine, where you're pressing down into the floor. Keep increasing every second that goes by, you're adding more tension. Now go in the opposite direction, try to lift the chest through the arms, try to tense up on the opposite side, the posterior side of your spine. Keep a high point with the eyes if you'd like to, but you're focusing on all the tension coming from the posterior side. And remember the spine, the vertebrae. Don't try and move with your shoulders. Your shoulders were stiff to stop you from moving, but it's now your vertebrae that are almost contracting, those small little muscles that connect your vertebrae. Now relax, big exhale. Try to just relax the body. Focus on your breath. Inhale. And nice long exhale. So you should have found with that position, just very sort of subtle awareness now of the spine. Certainly when we come out of this position, we're going to feel as if we've sort of contracted our vertebrae versus say just pushing and pulling with our shoulders in any sense. So I want you to relax now, come out of the position. You can just sort of bring your arms to the side, let your chest fall to the ground, And just like you would get out of a press up, you can push yourself out of that position and get up. So now that you're out of that position, I would encourage you just to start flexing and extending your spine and just getting it moving. We should now have a increased awareness of all of the tissue that surrounds our thoracic vertebrae, and we should feel as if we potentially have a little bit more workspace in terms of getting into T-spine extension versus, say, a heightened awareness of the lumbar region. If that was the case, if you actually do feel more of an awareness, like you've just worked more your lumbar spine, then I'd say you are probably too propped forward with the elbows. They're probably too close to you versus being further away and focusing more on that sort of upper area. If that was your first time doing it, don't feel too bad if you didn't necessarily get that tension or didn't feel like you worked very hard on that. I maybe encourage you to go at a much more lighter intensity that first time round. It's just about exposure with the spine. It's not really an area that we consider a lot of the time in terms of actually moving from. So if it's your first time, just be patient. You're going to repeat it, and you're certainly going to get better at both creating tension, understanding where the movement is actually coming from, and certainly opening up more workspace in the thoracic spine with that specific drill. So if you have any questions, be sure to leave it in the comment section. Be sure to like the video if you liked it. Subscribe to the page if you want more content like this, where we're working on mobility and actually learning how to strength train at our end range. So that was thoracic spine extension in a prone Sphinx position.